I don't want our church to be the one that has nicer and nicer amenities while there's a child starving, going hungry in the shadow of our steeple, and so we had this holy discontent to be a church that could really change things. But if you're familiar at all with the Bible Belt, I mean, it's like this whole church Christian culture. And I was like, I don't know if I, just with this little dream of mine can change a system that big. And so my wife and I, we just began to pray about where God wanted us. And it's funny because we were not looking at the West Coast at all.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, Multiply PDX's podcast. I'm Ahshuwah Hawthorne, Executive Director of Brilliance Labs, and I'm here with Pastor Gabe Kolstad of Westside Community Church.
How's it going?
And we got Ryan Sidhom here as our guest. He's the founding pastor of River City Church in Rose Village, West Vancouver, Washington. Yes, indeed, we do. Still like our northerner brothers over the river, and feel like we can learn a lot from them as well. How you doing, Ryan?
Doing great. How are you guys doing?
Very good.
Doing well.
Wow. How was your ice storm? And any stories from that?
Yes. Our ice storm was crazy. Our church, we ended up being the only shelter in the city of Vancouver that remained open 24/7 for homeless people trying to get out of the cold for the entirety of the below freezing event. And so, it remained below freezing for just over 8 days. And so we stayed open for 9 days, 24/7. And typically we have the capacity for 15 individuals on an emergency basis. But we ended up having close to 300 individuals come in and seek shelter in our building because everybody else was closed. There was nowhere else for them to go. And so you hear that I've got a little bit of a bug right now, a little bit of a sniffle. And I picked it up at the shelter. But it was nuts. But one of the things we did, we welcomed everybody in, and we fed them. They were saying literally, this is the best meal I've had in a long time. And then the next meal, they would say the very same thing. They're like, oh, wow, this one's wow, and so we fed them like kings and queens. We made sure that they felt at home. But then when we were kind of showing everybody, say, hey, it's time to get back out, one of the things we did, and this was specifically Melody, our director of operations, she spearheaded this. She has such a huge heart. She has like a Mother Teresa heart. But she said, hey, where are you trying to go next? How can we help you? And so we ended up buying hundreds of bus passes to try to get, through the city. We also bought, Greyhound trips. We bought Amtrak trips. And we even bought one individual a plane ticket to Nashville because that's where he needed to go next. And so we did our best to say, hey, you guys are welcome here. You guys will be loved here. But then, hey, let's help you get to where you're going next. So that's how our ice storm went. So,
wow. Now, for perspective, and our Portland listeners will know this probably, but Portland, they had to shut down their shelters because they didn't have enough staff. And like the city, which is pretty well funded, especially for homeless services, we're calling for volunteers to come through the ice, to come and volunteer at the shelters because they didn't have enough staff. And the city, right, with a multi-billion-dollar budget, had to close their shelters. And so here is River City Church keeping their shelter open, right? Okay, so you must be a mega church. You must be highly well staffed. This must be an amazing building and facility to house 300 people. Is that right, Ryan?
No, it's not at all. Very small church. We average, really 40 people or so on a Sunday. Yeah.
Wow.
And our building's not big at all, but you mentioned Portland, and we actually got several guests that were bussed in from Portland because as the hospitals would release people, I mean, we had so many Portland hospital wristbands that they would be pushed out into the cold with nowhere to go. And they're like, find a shelter. And the only shelter they could find was River City Church in Vancouver. And so we had a huge influx of Portland guests as well that were just looking for somewhere to keep warm. So,
Gosh, I have so many questions as you're sharing this, Ryan. One of them, I mean, just even as a pastor of a church, logistically, this must have been quite the undertaking, especially because you're not a mega church. You're not, I mean, like, I'm assuming the city of Vancouver wrote you a giant check to pay for all this. And, those are the things that come to mind. Like, okay, so wait, how did you pay for this? Oh, how did you get the team to do it? How did your team interact with these people? And who kept them going? Like, how did all that work? I'm just curious.
yeah, so we actually got a check for $84. Um,
Okay.
to help with what we were doing. So there's organizations in the city that are and I mentioned that we had capacity for 15, and we do this regularly every Saturday night. We have 15 basically pre-approved guests that have been through the interview process, no drugs, no alcohol, that kind of stuff. And we know they're going to be respectful of the property. And that's where the $84 comes in. We get $84 a week basically to help with toilet paper and, breakfast items, that kind of stuff. And so, what we did for the ice shelter, it spanned a Saturday evening. So that's where we got the $84 from. But other than that, we didn't get a single penny
Yeah.
to do this from any entities, if you will. But one of the things I thought was beautiful. I mean, the level of just response that we saw from the community, and when I mean the community, I mean people who are not church people. Like you look at their profile, you're like, okay, yeah, they're definitely not a church person, but they're sending money and they're saying, hey, how can we help volunteer? And they're bringing meals. We had several Vancouver area churches that said, hey, we're unable to open our doors right now, but can we send you money? Can we send you volunteers?
Wow.
And so we had multiple churches across the area send us volunteers, send us money, send us meals. And it's a hard ask, when we're saying, hey, we need somebody to cater lunch for 75 people. That's a lot. That's a big ask.
And you didn't have a lot of time in advance, right? You didn't plan this ahead of time. So,
well, nobody knew this was, I mean, like we knew the forecast. If you watched the forecast, we knew this was coming and we thought it was going to last 2.5, maybe 3 days.
yeah.
And it just kept getting extended and getting extended. And we're just like, literally like, hey, can somebody help us with breakfast in 3 hours? 75 people, and literally just have people stepping up and doing this. It was, and, in some instances, we had someone just like, hey, I can do a shepherd's pie for 25. We're like, okay, so now we need 50 more meals, and so just kind of piecing to get the things together. But it was a community effort. And we've got a pretty lean budget at River City. But one of the things that we always say is 100% of the money we collect on Sundays, especially, goes back out to the community. Not a single penny goes to like salaries or utilities or anything like that, because we have partner churches across the nation that see what we're doing and love it, and they help with that. So my salary is fundraised, so that allows 100% of our offering to go back out.
Wow.
And I think the fact that we've said that, so our church is 4.5 years old now at this point. We planted River City Church 10 months before the pandemic, April of 2019. And but from the beginning, we've always said that about our offerings going back out the door. And I think because we have that long runway of that reputation, people felt really good about knowing where their money was going when they give to River City Church, saying this is going directly to the shelter. This is not paying the salary of somebody who's staying warm and cozy watching the football game, you know.
Wow,
So,
That's a
that's
big difference.
powerful.
Yeah.
So, Ryan, we want to get into this theme and idea of city impact and being a blessing in our city. And you have some amazing stories about how that's been the case. And this is just one example from this last week. Um, but before we get there, let's just zoom back really quick for people that don't know you. Who is Ryan Sidhom, and how in the world did you get to West Vancouver?
yeah, so I'm just a simple Tennessee boy. That's all I am. I born and raised in Memphis, and I just, while I was down there, I just felt this just holy discontent of there's a lot of churches that are doing a lot of good things, but there are also a lot of churches that are just existing for lack of better words to build their own castle, to build the pastor's platform. And when there's I don't remember who said it, but one of the things that kind of sticks in my head is I don't want our church to be the one that has better, nicer and nicer amenities while there's a child starving, going hungry in the shadow of our steeple, and so we had this holy discontent to be a church that could really change things. But if you're familiar at all with the Bible Belt, I mean, it's like this whole church Christian culture. And I was like, I don't know if I, just with this little dream of mine can change a system that big. And so my wife and I, we just began to pray about where God wanted us. And, it's funny because we were not looking at the West Coast at all, like at all. We were looking at New York. We were looking at some other places. And, just one day I woke up and, the Lord had put the Portland Metro on my heart. And so I literally couldn't shake it. Went to bed, spent my day doing my thing, and then went to bed again next day, Portland. And so, I Googled, where is Portland? Because I was it was so far removed from, my mind. I don't have any friends. I'd have no dealings with Portland. And so, and it scared me. What I saw, what I read, I was like, this city is not like my city, and so, and so I was like, but after a few months of keeping it to myself and being scared, I literally called my mentor. I said, hey, Doc, what do you know about Portland? And he said, why? And I explained what I was experiencing. He said, Ryan, God's trying to get your attention. Like, what does your wife think? I said, I haven't told her because I'm scared. And he said, go home right now. Tell her what you're feeling. And so I went home and I said, I really feel like God placed an area of the country on my heart that he's calling us to. And she said, where? I said, the Portland area. And she kind of leaned back and smiled. And I was like, what are you thinking? She goes, God told me the Portland area. And I was like,
Whoa.
what? And so, long story short, we ended up coming up here for a church planting assessment through a network. And after we did the assessment, we kind of went all around the metro, basically looking at, and this is our very first time to the West Coast. And we started in downtown Portland, and I literally had a moment of crisis. I was like, this is not where I feel like God wants us. Like, have I been misinterpreting what God has been saying all this time? And so we went as far south as Canby, Oregon, and literally just saying, no, this is not it. The guy that was driving us around, he drove us to, Washougal, Washington. Like, no. Camas, Washington. No. And literally as we're driving through Vancouver, we're driving down one of the main streets, Fourth Plain Boulevard. I have no idea where we are. I just say, hey, can you pull the car over right here? And he pulls over, and my wife and I, we get out and we kind of just look and we look around, and our eyes meet over the top of the car. And we're like, this is it. We feel like this is where God wants us. Where are we? And he said, well, we're in Vancouver. And I was like, we're in Canada? Like, I guess I had no clue, like, what was going on. But that's the story. Like, we haven't turned our eyes back since. Like, that was the moment where God confirmed, like, we were just driving through where, unbeknownst to us, we were just a block away from where our physical building sits right now.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah. So,
Man, we've hung out a lot and I've never heard that story. That's amazing. I love that.
Wow. Okay, so that's kind of that's the origin story.
yeah.
Now let's get into this, describing some of the fruit of this work. Now, I know, so just having gotten to know you, I've told people this. I've said, like, you're genuinely one of the most warm-hearted, like, pastoral-hearted human beings I've ever met. And with that comes a real, just genuine humility. So I'm gonna poke on that humility a little bit, and we want to brag on you, but we give you a chance to share some stories, giving glory to God.
Okay.
But, you guys must have a really robust marketing budget and do a lot of advertising spending, because hasn't your little church been in the Vancouver newspaper like a dozen times or something like that? And tell us a little bit about free promotions and things that city leaders or reporters have said about your church.
Yeah. So, I've lost count, honestly, of the stories, but I lost count somewhere around 26. And so, stories in the Columbian. And, it's funny because just yesterday, my wife was Googling something and she said, hey, Ryan, did you know that the Columbian did a story on us in September of 2023? I was like, no, I had no idea. And so here we are, like 5 months later, just now realizing that the newspaper did a story on us 5 months ago. But
Probably a lot of dirt, right? Because when liberal newspapers write stories about, like, Bible teaching churches, they're usually a lot of, like, negative stuff, right?
yeah, the newspapers love church scandals, and
Yeah, they do.
but not a single one of our news press has been a scandal. It's all been what we're doing in the community. The story in September was literally the day that we, on a Sunday, went out on Fourth Plain Boulevard with our trash pickers and just went up and picked up trash up and down the street. And they're like, "What church does this on a Sunday morning instead of preaching and collecting offering?" That's a big thing. It's like they're not collecting money. They're out collecting trash to make the city a better place. And so, the strategy kind of, it goes back to when we were preparing to launch River City Church, leading up to Easter Sunday 2019. We did a community survey, and the community survey was very simple. We said, number one, what does this community need? And we listened as people said things like, this community needs something for the homeless population because there's not many resources for the homeless population. This community needs family-friendly opportunities on the weekend because it's so expensive to work. So both partners are working, Monday through Friday, and on the weekend we want something to do with our kids. We heard from the millennials that said, we want volunteer opportunities on the weekend because if I'm trying to volunteer and the only opportunity is on a Tuesday at 1, I'm working, so we need volunteer opportunities on the weekend. And one of the things we heard is we need somebody, this community needs love because nobody loves Rose Village. It's a dirty place. That's what we heard. And then the second question we asked was, does this neighborhood need a new church? And there had been a recent, kind of big church scandal, not too far from us. And that was kind of fresh in the memory and the minds of everybody. And so one of the things that was honestly kind of a crisis moment for us was every single survey that we asked out of 100, we did more than 100, but out of 100 being like, does this neighborhood need a new church? 0 people said yes. And so I'm literally thinking,
Even the Christians, right? You had to have
yeah,
some Christians that answered that. Even the Christians didn't think you needed more churches.
we don't need a new church in this neighborhood. No, thank you. Pass. And I'm literally thinking, is God really calling us to start a church in a neighborhood where nobody wants us? But as I was kind of digesting those community survey results, I was also reading the book of Acts, because if you're going to plant a church, that's the book you need to read. Right? And so I'm hanging out in Acts, and as I was digesting these community surveys, I happened to be on Acts 2:42 through 47, where it talks about how, the first church came together and they were constantly devoted to the apostles' teaching. They sold everything that they had so that nobody among them was in need. They met together daily in each other's homes, breaking bread together, including the Lord's Supper, and they were constantly devoted to prayer. And so I was looking at these 4 pillars, if you will, of what existed in the early church. And I thought, are we really constantly devoted to prayer? I don't know if we are. We like to do the bookend prayers, like God bless what we're about to do, and then do something and say, God bless what we just did. Right. And so I'm like, okay, so not there. Do we really sacrificially give until it hurts? Do we sell everything that we have so that nobody among us is in need? I don't know if we do, do we really enjoy spending time together, breaking bread together? No, it's kind of like, who's that guy? Oh, I go to church with him. What's his name? I don't know, but I can tell you what pew he sits in, you know? And so it's like, are we constantly devoted to the teaching of the apostles? Yes, that one we do. You come in, you sit down, and you do church with your eyeballs in your ears. And I was like, that's 25%. What would it look like if we were to have a church that was actually really devoted to prayer, but then going back to the surveys, selling everything that we have so that nobody among us was in need? Volunteer opportunities on the weekend. What about that? Breaking bread together daily in each other's homes. Family-friendly opportunities on the weekend that people can. I was like, we could meet those needs in this community in a biblical way. And so we had this idea to do a unique rhythm in our church called study, serve, study, play. So that means the first and third Sunday of every month is devotion to the apostles' teaching. It's preaching from the Word of God, church as you know it. But the second Sunday of every month, we cancel, if you will, our worship service, and we do service as worship. We flip it on its head, and we take care of all the logistics, and we just say, are you looking to volunteer? We need hands. And we'll do a service project together. And then fourth Sunday is play, where we'll do family-friendly opportunities on the weekend just to have fun together and get to know each other better. It's breaking bread together. And so I literally had this idea for study, serve, study, play. And I talked to one of the guys that was kind of helping us at the very beginning. I said, and he's a Portland native. I said, study, serve, study, play. I was like, talk me out of this. And he heard it. He goes, I think that's what this community needs. And that was the beginning of, let's try this crazy experiment. So we launched on Easter Sunday, 2019. And our fourth Sunday was on Mother's Day, the second Sunday in May. And so we're right away going off of this thing. That's our service project. How can we do a service project? So we decided to do this thing called Calling All Supermoms. And you ask how much money we spend on Facebook advertising and whatnot. That's the only event we've ever paid for Facebook advertising. And the ad that went out was, do you know a single mom in the community that's working extra hard? She's just killing it, but she's not getting the support that she deserves because her kids are too young and she's not going to have a good Mother's Day. Nominate her. Tell us her story because we want to bless her. So we did this event called Calling All Supermoms. We had these moms come in that are no connection to the church whatsoever. And we were able to bless them with each one walked away with over $1,500 worth of goods and services, like steak dinner coupons and massages and facials and like nails and all that kind of stuff. And while they were like in our sanctuary, they were getting like foot soaks and, all that kind of stuff. And all the women were inside doing that, while myself and all the other men, we were outside in our swimming trunks giving them car washes. And the newspaper showed up that day on the fourth Sunday in the life of River City Church. The newspaper shows up and goes, hold on a second, what's going on here? And so that was when our first story came out, was when we were less than a month old. And we hit the newspaper. We're just like, what's happening? This is crazy. And so we've just kind of continued on in that pattern. Second Sunday of every month, we do something. And by the grace of God, we seem to have just caught the attention of the community. So that answers how we did it, but also how much money are we spending on marketing?
Wow. So you're telling me loving and serving your community and letting your light shine, like people actually hear about it, your good deeds, and glorify God in heaven for it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It works.
Yeah.
Ryan, one of the things that I just find fascinating is, well, one, I'm so thankful for you because you set a pace for creativity in ministry that I think we all enjoy watching and absorbing. And I hope everybody's listening, not feeling threatened like, geez, we're really not cutting it, but instead, wow, there's an idea we could try. But the other thing that I just find fascinating is that most church leaders, raising my hand here, look at this kind of thing and go, that's not sustainable. You're raising outside funds to make this happen. At what point could it ever click over into a fully sustainable church movement in Vancouver? And I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that, but I think the reason why so many churches feel afraid to try stuff like this is because we'd look at it and go like, we're gonna have to close the doors. How do you sustain this? I think you're proving that it can be sustainable because you sustained it for 4.5 years. But how do you feel about what the responsibility is for you of pastoring the people in your community towards self-sustaining ministry? How do you feel about that?
Yeah. So if we're relying on tithes and offerings alone, it is 100% unsustainable. There's no way to do it.
Yeah.
Even, 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, I don't think relying on tithes and offerings alone is a self-sustainable model for the kind of ministry that we're doing in the neighborhood that we're doing it. For frame of reference, and people don't understand, it's all relative. Like how many tithes and offerings you collect on a Sunday. Well, 2 weeks ago, we collected our tithes and offerings on a Sunday. We got $65. Period.
Wow.
Like, typically they're a little bit higher than that. But it wasn't like too surprising. $65 and be like, oh, it wasn't like that. Yeah. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, it's just one of those Sundays, and so it's completely unsustainable if you rely on that. But one of the things we're looking into the community is, what are ways that we as a church in a neighborhood, in a community that doesn't want another church, how can we actually add value to the community? What are some things that we can do? And so one of the things we're blessed with is a building. And so we're trying to find ways to use that building, not only just Monday through Friday, but 7 days a week.
Yeah.
How can we use that building to bless the community, to add value, but then also maybe generate a little bit of income? So one of the things we do, we have, our neighbor, is Seymour Health Clinics, which is a Washington State thing, but they moved in after we did, and they came to us and they're like, hey, how much to rent your parking lot? Because we need an extra parking spaces. And one of the things that we kind of just felt led to do was, I don't think a good neighbor says, oh, you got to pay this much money to park here. And so we just said, just park here. And if you guys have extra money, kind of, you can send it our way, as a donation, but we're not going to invoice you, if you will. And so now on a monthly recurring basis, they actually send us a donation, which is a
Wow.
win for their organization as well, because they're able to write that off because
Yeah.
it's a donation to what we're doing. But it's helping sustain what we're doing. And so that's not a typical, and I know not everybody has a building, but it's just thinking creatively of ways to actually add value and utilize, what the Lord has gifted us with, to find creative ways to make money. And that's, one of the guys that I love reading is Mark DeMoss, out of Arkansas. And just, the way that his model is, creating a separate nonprofit that essentially helps with the social justice piece as well as the financial piece, so that the church can just keep doing the spiritual piece. And it's a three-legged stool he refers to. And so that's, I'm not the authority on that, but I think Mark DeMoss would be. But that's just kind of what we're thinking through, is what are creative ways? Because there's going to be a point when our funders in North Carolina, Texas, Tennessee, Louisiana, they're like, we've been sending money this way for a long time. We have some donors that have been with us. It's just such a blessing, you guys. There's a small group of just, retired ladies that meet together monthly to talk about how can we use our resources, to bless missions. And so they come together to like knit like hats for preemies and stuff. But for 7 years, this is before we ever started River City Church, they started sending us $50 a month, and it's like, that's not, like, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a whole ton of money, but they've been doing it for 7 years, and there's going to come a point where they're like, maybe we should start funding another ministry, but I'm extremely grateful for them, and the impact that they've made.
Yeah.
But that's not the sustainable model.
Right. But I do, one, congratulate you on being committed enough to this vision to do what you have to do. And again, like, I'm not sure a lot of us leaders would be willing to go, all right, I'm going to go raise my salary. And so that we can use all of our church funding for ministry in the community. That's somewhat convicting even to think about. But I'm so glad you've done it. And I think I hear you saying, maybe we have to get more creative than just, if we're going to serve underserved areas like this, than just relying on tithes and offerings to determine what's the scale of the ministry. Maybe we need to think outside of that box. And I love that.
One of the things, and this is terrible practice, do not copy me on this, but one of the things the Lord kind of led us to do in our ministry is we don't look at what we have and then make a budget from it. We look at the need and then budget from the need. And so basically I'm looking at, okay, how can we spend, this is what we're going to need to spend this year in order to meet this need. And literally we had a church meeting to approve this budget that we had. And we're like, that's a lot of money, but it was unanimous vote. It was a faith vote. Like, we can do this.
Wow.
Because it's basically putting forth our operating budget, not with what we have, but with how do we meet the need, and trusting that God is going to help sustain us through it.
So Ryan, I am always challenged and convicted in hearing your stories and connecting with you. Let's tease out one more area that may be rather convicting for the church leaders that are listening.
I think I'm topping out on conviction here.
Well, we're just gonna we're gonna keep pressing it because this guy's on fire. So let's talk church buildings, okay? And let's talk about hey, a lot of money. I mean, if you just look at the stats, right? The majority of church budgets go to paying their staff and paying for that facility. And I would argue that most churches have underutilized spaces, that they're used, right, on Sundays, and it's packed out, and all the spaces are developed around making it effective for Sunday. And perhaps they have a church offices, maybe they have a men's meeting, maybe they have a kitchen that they use once a week. But for the most part, that thing sits empty. Tell us about how many people go through your property and your building on a given week? How many different groups are utilizing that property? And what fruit have you seen from being generous with the space that God's given you? And also, what challenges, like what cost have you paid dealing with opening up the doors of the church to the community?
Yeah, that's a lot. Um, it's hard to estimate the amount of people that pass through. But let me just start talking it out. So we have on average 8 or so nonprofits per week that utilize our building. And that, it fluxes because some people use it weekly, some people use it quarterly or annually. But so we have a pretty robust church use calendar, building use calendar. But one of the things we also do is we are able to feed. The number keeps growing basically every month. But this past week, we were able to feed 900 families
Wow.
just in one weekend with food boxes. And that's 900 families. I have no idea how many. I can't do that kind of math. So how many people that is, I don't know. Yeah, we've paid the cost. So last year, towards the end of the year, we had everything that could have gone wrong with our building went wrong at once. We had a catastrophic plumbing failure where we had to abandon all of the plumbing underneath our building and rerun it through the ceilings. In a weekend, basically, like we had to turn around and do it quick. And we ended up racking up a bill around close to $250,000 in building repairs that just needed to be done. But, by the grace of God, one of the things that happened was we had multiple contractors who have no connection to our church say, like, literally, they would give us the invoice and be like, I know what you guys are doing. I know what funds are like with you guys. So here, the work's done and it's not due until December of 2024. I'm like, what? And he goes, we know you're good for it. So just pay it off as you can. And so it's not even a loan. But it's like, hey, just make payments if you can. It's not a payment plan or anything like that. It's just do this, do it when you can. And so it's been really cool to see. We've had some donors across the nation that have been really generous with us and say, hey, we're going to help you get your building back up to where it needs to be. But at the same time, we're not going to stop doing it. So like one of the things that Ahshuwah and Brilliance Labs helped us with is our Thanksgiving Day outreach. And so on Thanksgiving Day this year, we fed I'm blanking on the number, but it was around 400 individuals Thanksgiving meal on that day. But we utilized on that day over 90 volunteers. We don't even have that many people in our church, right? But 90 volunteers came out on Thanksgiving Day to help us serve the community in this way. And one of the things that's been convicting to me is, when we talk about, and this is a whole nother topic for another podcast potentially, but the bless rhythms of begin with prayer, which is so important. We need to begin with prayer in everything that we do, but else being listen and engage. And one of the things that I was convicted with is I don't know if I was doing a good enough job listening to the community that we're trying to reach. Because as a church leader, I would hear things like, here's just a good example. I would hear things, I'm sure every church leader has heard this one. Church buildings are tax exempt. So shouldn't they be the ones to be opening up their doors to the homeless? And initially my gut check reaction is, yeah, but you don't understand. There's a lot more that goes into it. There's logistics, there's cleanup, there's volunteers, there's yada, 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 yada. But actually somebody said that once and I thought, like, what would it look like if we actually listened to the people that we're trying to reach? And you know what? Yeah, let's try it. Yeah, so we're going to open up our building as a homeless shelter. And that was before the ice storm. That was, ice storm was just next level nuts crazy. But so we actually began opening up our doors to the homeless when we were 6 months old as a church. And then, one of the things that we ended up doing, because we had opened our doors to the homeless, when COVID hit, we were 10 months old. And you guys will remember the first 2 weeks of COVID was just so crazy. Like every gas station was closed, every fast food restaurant was closed. And we have in our neighborhood in Rose Village at the time, there was about 1,000 homeless individuals within a 20-minute walk of our building. We know that stat because there was a day center right across the street that it was, I think, October of 2019, they logged 976 individual guests that checked in that month. So that's almost 1,000. And so all of a sudden, you have 1,000 homeless individuals that have nowhere to use the bathroom, let alone wash their hands in a global pandemic. And that's not good. And so River City, we were able to respond and use our parking lot to turn it into what we called the fourth plane pit stop on the street, fourth plane. We had a row of porta potties that were sanitized after each individual use by our volunteers, because that's what the state health department required with COVID, sanitization after each use. 2 hand washing stations and a shower trailer. And we ran that 7 days a week for 3 months. And so you have a bunch of people in the city that we're trying to reach saying, why aren't churches doing more for the homeless? Then all of a sudden, they're like, hold on a second. What's going on over here? And we've been able to utilize that to point people to Jesus. This has been your famous hang up. What now? The hang up's gone. So
Okay, are you convicted yet, Gabe?
I'm melting over here.
I was hearing the excuse of, but I'm so busy as a pastor, and my people are so busy, and you're describing all these activities and things that are like I've already booked
Yeah.
my calendar and my church's calendar with study, right? And with Sunday morning service and with small groups, and it's all very kind of just inward focused, but it's busy, and I'm already busy. And now you're describing this other thing that has like almost a burden of, well, now you should actually be hosting this, and this, and this, to have an impact in your community. Yeah, I don't know. What do you say to that feeling of just, I'm already so busy. How could I do these things?
yeah, so it's we built it into the existing schedule. And so there's a lot of things that we do that are extra now because the Lord has given us that influence or that platform, if you will. But if we were to scale it down just to look at a regular church calendar, um, the second Sunday of every month, I'm not preparing a sermon, but I'm putting together logistics for a service project. So I'm literally going to Amazon and I'm like, okay, I think we're going to need X amount of trash pickers. We're going to need X amount of, bright colored traffic vests so that we can be visible out in the community, so that traffic doesn't hit us. We're going to need this many trash bags. Hey, I'm going to print out Google Maps and I'm going to form, some routes so that we can take walking, so that we can actually go to point A and walk back in 45 minutes and meet back here at, the convening place. And so but the reality is like, I'm replacing sermon prep time with volunteer prep time. And so the people who are coming to church on Sunday at 11, they're not adding anything more to their calendar. They're showing up Sunday at 11, and 1 week they're sitting down and they're listening to a sermon, and the next week they're putting on gloves and we're still out the door at 12:30. And so we're just finding ways to actually what is the calendar that we're confined to? Now, how can we build these things into that calendar without adding extra? So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
But it's hard. It's a sacrifice because, I mean, one of the stories I like to tell is when I was with so Mayor Ann showed up to one of our service project Sundays, and we were standing outside on the patio, and she looked at me and she said, "Ryan, why are you doing this? Like, why does your church do this? I'm assuming you guys usually collect money on regular Sundays." I said, "Yeah, we do." And she said, "But you're not collecting money today." I said, "No, we're not." She said, "That seems like, you know, why are you doing this?" And it was, even that was an opportunity to share. It's like, well, Jesus says that we will be recognized, his disciples will be known for their love for one another. And I said, so we want to be known by our love. That's why we're doing this. We wanted to be a church that could actively really impact the neighborhood in which we've been placed. And so, and that was a beautiful moment to be able to kind of share the why behind what we're doing, but it is a real sacrifice because that's a Sunday that we're struggling. If we have 30 people in our church and we have 220 show up, most of them are not church people. One of the things they're going to say is, "I don't go to church because all they do is ask for money." We've all heard that. So how am I going to have that audience and say, "All right, thanks for coming. Now show me the money," right? It's just something that we've tried to, and we're still figuring it out. So,
Praise God. You're living out that Tim Keller quote about how when the city sees the church, they should say, "Hey, I might not agree with their sexual ethic, but if they ever left, we'd have to raise taxes."
mhm.
And sadly, I don't think that's honestly true of most churches. But I wouldn't be surprised if the mayor would agree with that statement about River City. So
Yeah.
thanks for being an example and a challenge to us.
Yeah, I'm resigning as of right now. I'm just kidding. I love this stuff though. Hey, one of the things that I feel like I see here, you read about stuff like this in books, and some of those are the books you're like, yeah, that was a hard book to read. I'm going to move on to something easier now. Um, but, but Ryan, if you think about what your vision was when you came, why you signed up for this, it sounds like that's some of what's been happening, and I love it. And again, all of us really would look at what should the Church of Jesus be in our city. It is this center of flourishing that you're seeing, this kind of like even commingling with non-believers and city leaders and all of this. And I mean, I know that the mayor thinks very highly of what you're doing and all of that. It's great stuff. And it's, probably for, especially if there's somebody who's watching or listening, that's a leader of an existing church, turning a ship around is very difficult. What are some of the ways that you would say, here's some practical ways you could get started moving toward some of this integrated ministry, some of these community serving things, being high impact in your community? What are some things that you would suggest for church leaders listening?
Yeah. And that's such a hard question. And I just want to start off by saying, I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that. Because turning an existing ship around I don't have that experience. But I think, it's going back to listening to your community. It's like, what are the real felt needs? And I think not only just listening and saying, okay, we listened, but actually doing something about it on a regular basis. Um, you know, be, because of our model where we're serving people on a monthly basis, and that's
Mm-hmm.
church is our second Sunday. Um, as a church plant that receives funding from different networks, we have to fill out reports every month about, ministry activity and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that is interesting that I've seen is there's a certain question that gets asked that I feel like typically the people receiving the reports aren't very happy with me about because I break their algorithms. And it's, they ask how many, what's your attendance? And so you'll fill that out. And they say, what percentage of your people are serving the community regularly on a monthly basis? And I think the typical answer,
250%.
is 10%. Think about your church context. How many people are actually serving the community on a regular basis? And so every month, our highest attended Sunday month to month without fail is our service project. Because we're in a community that puts such a high value on volunteerism. So we have a bunch of people that are getting a foot in the door to a relationship with Jesus because they come out and hang out with us every month for this. So I put on this report 100%, because if our regular attendance is 30, but we have 220 showing up to serve on a Serve Sunday, and those are some real numbers that we've seen.
Wow.
I mean, I don't want to be, I don't want to try to puff ourselves up and say more than 100%, even though that's the truth,
Uh-huh.
but it breaks the algorithms. And so, one of the things I think about is, I've been a part of a church that we've been like, man, you remember that service project that we did? That was really good of us, huh? Remember that thing we did 3 years ago? That was awesome. And part of what I think the community is looking for is not for a church that did something 3 years ago. It's, what are you doing now? What did you do last week? What are your plans for next week or next month? Like being active. And so it's just finding ways to empower volunteers for what they're passionate about. If you look, there's some crazy stories that are emerging even just right now. But one of the things is this there's a one of Portland famous-ish mascots, Rojo the llama. I don't know if you guys have heard of Rojo the llama. It's a therapy llama that recently got featured on BBC because the therapy alpacas and llamas were in the Portland airport, but we've, by the grace of God, one of the guests that have recently been showing up at River City Church is part of this organization. And she's like, how I've been praying for how we can use our llamas to point people to Jesus.
Wow.
And
I think we got a hook for this episode. Therapy llamas.
I don't be careful, because I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth and advertise anything that's not really happening yet. But let me just say this: like, we did a giant Christmas party in December for immigrant and refugee families that spoke 12 different languages that are connected to our public school system. And basically, the invite went out from the public school system for them to come to this Christmas party where we were able to help them have an American Christmas, especially when they were unable to afford it. So the parents went shopping through all the donations and all that kind of stuff. But we were able to share the Luke 2 Christmas story and across all these different languages. But one of the things that was so cool was you see these little, 3 and 4 year olds walk around the corner to enter our building, and their eyes just light up as they see a therapy llama dressed up like a reindeer in our lobby.
I wondered what was coming. That's pretty good.
You talk about, like, I think one of the things we need to do as church leaders is not only listen to the community around us and say, how can we respond to the need, but we need to listen to the people that God has sent us. We need to realize that we as the leaders are not the only ones that God speaks to. God is speaking to the priesthood of all believers, and God has placed ministry ideas on their hearts. Now, I'm not talking about the person who comes up and says, hey, pastor, I think you should do this. Pass. you know, but hey, pastor, I think we are equipped to help spearhead this ministry or meet this need. And to that, I'm able to say, do you think you are the right person to run with
Yeah.
this? If you are, you have my blessing. What do you need from me? But just know that I'm not going to spearhead your passion. You know, I'm not going to spearhead the llama ministry because God has not equipped me for that. But if you say, I feel like God has been asking me to do this and I'm equipped to do it, my answer as a church leader is, how can I equip you to fulfill your calling that God has put on your life to reach how you're listening to the community?
Mm-hmm.
So if that makes sense.
Ooh, that's a beautiful mic drop right there, Ryan. Nice job. I love that. As we're wrapping up, I think one of the things people are going to want to know is, how do I get a hold of this guy, Ryan? What would you say? What's the best way for people to reach you?
Ryan at rivercityvancouver.com is my email address.
Okay.
I deleted Facebook off of my phone, and I don't really do social media anymore just as much because it's just too much of a distraction. There's too much going on.
Yeah.
But just my email, Ryan at rivercityvancouver.com.
Very cool. And I think it's possible to just, if there's somebody out there listening going like, I'm not really serving that kind of community, but I'd like to get involved, that might be a possibility. Maybe this is a partnership that you'll consider to get involved with River City. Obviously, there's an opportunity that's pretty significant. So thanks so much for joining us, guys. Thanks for being here today. It's going to be awesome to see this message go out.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.